In 1903, a single insect the size of a grain of rice was quietly eating the economy of an entire territory, not metaphorically. Across the sugar plantations of Hawaii, a small brown plant hopper called the sugarcane leafhopper had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and it was breeding into the millions, then the billions, coating the cane in a black sooty film, draining the plants dry from the inside until whole fields simply collapsed into a scorched, blighted tangle. This was the industry that ran the islands. Sugar was the money, the jobs, the reason ships came and went, and in the space of 2 or 3 years, growers watched harvests crash by more than half. In the worst districts, some fields yielding almost nothing at all, an economy staring at the edge of ruin because of a bug you could barely see. The planters threw everything they had at it, and nothing worked. What finally saved them was not a chemical, not a machine, not a quarantine, not a mountain of money. It was something smaller than the pest itself. An insect so tiny most people would never notice it in a lifetime of walking through a cane field. Shipped across the Pacific in the hope, honestly not much more than a hope, that it would do the one thing every human effort had failed to do. This is the story of how one of the smallest animals ever, deliberately let loose on American soil, rescued an entire industry, and quietly wrote the rulebook for a whole science. I'm Edmund Hale. Let's get into it. To understand the panic, you have to understand what Hawaii had built. By the turn of the 20th century, sugar was not one industry among many on the islands. It was the industry, a vast interlocking machine of plantations, mills, ports, and labor that shaped who lived there and how. And that machine had a fatal weakness nobody had thought about, because it was built on a single crop, grown in enormous, unbroken stretches of genetically similar cane. A monoculture like that is a buffet with the doors flung open. All a pest needs is to arrive, and around 1900, one did. The leafhopper, when it came, behaved the way an invader behaves when it lands somewhere with nothing to stop it. Back home, wherever a species evolves, it drags a whole invisible entourage along with it, the predators and parasites that have spent millions of years learning to eat it, keeping its numbers pinned down to a level the ecosystem can absorb. Strip an animal out of that web and drop it alone into a place with none of its old enemies, and something frightening happens. It stops being one thread in a system and becomes a runaway. The Hawaiian leafhopper had no natural checks on the islands at all, so it did the math that all unchecked things do. It bred, and the females sliced into the cane to lay their eggs, and the young sucked the sap until the plant starved, and a sticky honeydew rained down and grew a black mold that choked off the light the cane needed to live. Fields that had been green and heavy went yellow, then brown, then dead. And here is the part that captures the whole crisis. The planters were not helpless men. They were wealthy, organized, and determined, and they tried the obvious things, the sprays and treatments, and the frantic clearing of infested cane. It was like bailing the ocean. You cannot spray your way out of an insect breeding in the billions across tens of thousands of acres. Every conventional answer ran straight into the sheer scale of the thing. So the growers, out of something close to desperation, funded an idea that at the time sounded almost like witchcraft. Instead of fighting the pest directly, they would go and find its enemies. They hired entomologists and sent them out across the world. And the plan was audacious in its simplicity. Somewhere out there, in the leafhopper's original home, lived the creatures that had evolved to hunt it. Find them, bring them back, let them loose. It meant scouring cane-growing regions on the far side of the Pacific, crouching in foreign fields, collecting insects one at a time, then keeping them alive through weeks of rolling sea voyage, in an era with no refrigeration, no air freight, nothing but tins and patience, and the hope that the fragile cargo would still be breathing when the ship docked. And it meant screening them with real care, watching what they fed on, testing them before release, because the last thing anyone wanted was to solve one plague by importing another. This was slow, uncertain, unglamorous work, funded on faith by growers who had no guarantee any of it would pay off. And what they carried home was almost laughably small. The hero of this story is a parasitic wasp, barely a millimeter long, a speck with wings, called Paranagris, and alongside it, a handful of other tiny wasps and predators. No sting you would ever feel, no swarm, nothing you would notice. What this wasp does, though, is one of the quietest, strangest, most surgical acts in the natural world. It hunts down the leafhopper's eggs, the ones tucked into slits in the cane, and it lays its own egg inside them. And then the wasp's larva does something that sounds like science fiction but happens billions of times a day, all over the planet. It consumes the pest's egg from the inside, so that where a leafhopper should have hatched, a new wasp emerges instead, ready to find the next batch. Turn that loose across a plantation, and it becomes a slow, relentless, self-spreading tide of destruction aimed at exactly one target. The wasps found the eggs. They multiplied. They spread on their own, field to field, faster than any crew could ever have carried them, hunting the pest into corners no sprayer could reach, and asking for nothing in return. No wages, no fuel, no second application. And the fields came back. Within just a few years of the releases, the leafhopper that had nearly toppled the whole industry was pressed down to a background nuisance. Its billions checked by an insect you would need a lens to see clearly, and the cane grew green and heavy again, as though the catastrophe had never happened. Now, here is the catch, because a story this clean can make the whole thing sound easier and safer than it was, and honesty matters here. Deliberately releasing a foreign creature to fix a problem is exactly how some of the worst ecological disasters in history got started. The very same instinct, bring in an animal to control a pest, gave the world cautionary tales that are still unfolding. Get it wrong, misjudge what your import will eat once it runs out of its intended target, and you do not solve one problem, you manufacture a second one that never leaves. The leafhopper rescue worked in large part because the people running it were careful about a single crucial question. How specialized is this enemy? A parasite that will only lay its eggs inside one particular pest is a scalpel. A generalist that will eat whatever it pleases is a loaded gun pointed at everything. The wasps in this story were close to the scalpel end, tied tightly to their host, and that specificity is the difference between a triumph and a regret. It is a distinction the science took hard, painful decades to fully learn, and the leafhopper program stands as one of the early cases that helped teach it. So step back and look at the whole shape of it. An industry that ran an entire territory, brought to the brink by an insect the size of a grain of rice, saved not by force or money or machinery, but by an even smaller insect, doing precisely the job it had evolved over millions of years to do. That is the part I keep coming back to. We tend to assume that the answer to a big problem must itself be big, expensive, engineered, under our control. And here the answer was almost invisible, nearly free, and entirely out of our hands the moment we let it go. The planters did not defeat the leafhopper. They found the one thing that already knew how, and had the humility to step back and let it work. The wasps are still out there in the islands, by the way, still hunting, still keeping the balance. Generations of them living and dying in the cane, without a single one of us noticing. So here is what I want to leave you with. Is a rescue like this a triumph of human cleverness, or a humbling reminder that nature had the solution all along, and we were simply wise enough, for once, to get out of its way? I genuinely want to know what you think, so tell me down in the comments. If this changed how you see these tiny creatures, share it with someone who thinks a bug is just a bug, and subscribe, because the natural world is full of stories exactly this strange, and I've got plenty more to tell you. I'm Edmund Hale. Thanks for watching.